So Challenger 5 is, around the corner. It's coming up in September. There's some big changes that have happened in Gwent, actually just announced, in the past couple days, and that are affecting everybody on Wednesday. I guess it's the 31st. Is there a 31st? 31st of July. So maybe it's time to also revise a few other things in the competitive scene. Maybe it's time to implement a different tournament format. So since its inception of the Gwent Masters series and all major tournaments otherwise, Gwent has essentially progressed its tournament and competitive scene in the same format, which is essentially you bring a certain amount of decks and one gets banned, and then you have to win in a conquest format with the other decks in order to advance or to win your matchup. Now, that's good and fine, and it's definitely worked, but I thought maybe with a grander card pool being available now, with more strategies developing, maybe it's time to perhaps create a different type of tournament format that had more of a best of 3 feel per decks and implement a sideboard. Now, how does this work? Well, what is a sideboard? First of all, for those who don't know, a sideboard is a pool of cards that is separate from your main deck that in a best of 3 or 5 or whatever, you are allowed between games to pick and choose cards that you then swap from your main deck to your sideboard and vice versa. So let's say there's a particular strategy that you are weak against. You might have cards in your sideboard that can counter it. This is something that is in other tournaments. This is in other games. This is not something new that I've come up with. This is a tournament format that has existed for years and years and years and years successfully. Maybe it's time that Gwent possibly looked at the same option now that there are more cards and factions and strategies that have evolved over Gwent's 2.5 to 3 year existence. So what is this going to work? Well, a sideboard would essentially be, the format rather of the tournament would essentially be no bans, best of 3. So every player comes in with 3 decks from 3 different factions. So let's say you're coming in with Scoia'tael, Skellige, and Monsters. Your leaders and whatnot is all up to you. You come in with your decks all under the provision cap, no problem. Each of those decks has a sideboard, and each of those decks has to win a best of 3. Now, if you win the best of 3 of the best of 3, then you move on. So game 1, in match number 1, player A chooses Skellige, player B chooses Scoia'tael. They have to have a best of 3 between those 2 decks with sideboards. So if player A loses match 1, he can then go into his sideboard, swap cards in as long as they're provision legal, and then move on to the next game. The loser of every game gets to choose whether they want to go first or second, and then it moves on forward. Now, this seems ridiculous if you just make sure that every single card is available to you in a sideboard, but a sideboard actually has a limit. In other games, it is a limit based on the amount of cards you can have in a sideboard, but in Gwent, it's different because cards are obviously more powerful, less powerful, etc. There is a provision cost that is associated to the cards. So how about in Gwent, the sideboard has the limitation of a certain bank of provisions, be it 25 or 30 or whatnot. Every deck you bring of the 3 factions, so let's say it is Harold, let's say it's Francesca, and let's say it's Gernacora, each of those 3 decks is allowed a 30 provision sideboard. So in your sideboard, you can go heavy and play, let's say, a Scorch and, maybe another big gold card to supplement it, because you think that that's good enough for that. But others might actually they might actually opt rather to go with more of low provision cards, but a wider variety of them. Now, again, in the sideboarding, it's all about countering strategies and fixing your deck to better match up against your opponent. I think that this would make for a lot closer games, a lot more interesting games, and a lot of games that will go down further to the wire and make things a little bit more interesting. Again, this might seem like it'll make everything a lot longer, but if everybody's bringing 3 decks and you have to win win with 2 of your 3 decks to advance, that could still be a fairly quick matchup. It's not always going to be 3 games times 3 matchups. It's not always going to be 9 games. Now, that would be the outlier where 9 games are played, but it would make for a spectacular matchup and experience when it really goes down to the proverbial bottom of the ninth with 2 outs on your opponent. So this is my idea. I thought might be able to down the road look at playing with sideboards to maybe spice up the format rather than it being a ban here, a ban there, and then you got to win with the remaining decks. Nonetheless, hopefully, September rolls around. Challenger's going to bring some pretty interesting and unique new decks and strategies to the tournament scene, and that in itself is exciting. But just some food for thought that I'd like to see what you guys have on board for that. And again, all your constructive criticism is always appreciated. Let's hear what you have to think about it. Again, please, be kind about this. It's a discussion. It's not a witch hunt, or you don't need to burn me in effigy or anything. Regardless, everyone has opinions, and I'm excited to hear yours. So let's share them. Let's be kind. Thanks so much. Adios.